Hello and welcome back to Everyday Writers, your one-stop shop for demystifying the writing process and helpful guides on your journey to becoming a published writer. I'm one of your hosts, Jordan S. Keller.
And I'm your other host, Crystal McQueen. Thank you for joining us for this episode, Write Your Way, on Everyday Writers.
On this episode, we're going to be talking about keeping that writing ball rolling. We're talking about not comparing yourself to others, beating down that inner critic, and staying motivated.
I can't wait to dig into all of these topics. Let's start with comparison. Comparison is when we compare ourselves, our writing, and our achievement to others. So comparison is the enemy. Jordan, tell me about a time where comparison might have gotten in your way to achieving your writing goals.
Absolutely. So when I'm writing, I'm also reading just to stay motivated and stay inspired. And when I'm writing my first draft, it's obviously not as good as the books I'm reading. And so in the beginning, I felt very discouraged because I never thought that my writing would reach their levels. And it can feel very, like I said, discouraging because there's this giant hill you got to climb. And so comparing yourself to your favorite authors, especially in the early stages, is going to feel bad because they've perfected their craft. They've spent months and years and more years on these books, whereas you're just now starting, you're a couple of weeks into the game. And so in the beginning, I would have to stop reading, which was really terrible because I did really enjoy it. And I would have to just keep the two separate until I could handle both.
That's interesting. How long did it take you before you felt like you could start reading again?
It took until I finished the first draft of Wildfire, so about 6 months.
Okay. Was Wildfire the first book you ever wrote?
First book I ever completed.
First book you completed. Got it. I had a professor in college once tell me that once you start digging into writing and craft and trying to understand how people are putting things together, you'll never read a book the same. And it's true. My favorite thing to do when I look at a book is to look at the first sentence. I love a first sentence. I'm a sucker for it. Is it a line of dialogue? Is it something that's going to set the scene for me? I don't need to know everything about it, not the hook, not all of that kind of stuff, but just I need to know what setting I'm in. I need to be able to tell what genre I'm in. And that's a lot of pressure when you look at these books that are on the shelf and you're looking at some of your favorites and you're saying, oh my gosh, like, how long did it take you to write this first page?
100%. Now that I'm reading while writing, I'll see things like that. Like, that is such a smart way to incorporate that world aspect. Or, oh my gosh, that character trait came across so easily because of XYZ. And so now I'm no longer comparing and more studying. And so things that I like, I'll bookmark and save for later just to look back on and figure out how they did it. A good example is I used to introduce characters, and as soon as they walked into the room, you had their full description, their full background, and it was very naive and immature. And then in a book called Shadow and Flame, a character was introduced, and through dialogue, they added physical elements and hints of backstory, and that's how I learned, like, break up those aspects of your character throughout the scene instead of as soon as they walk in.
Okay, so I totally love that because so often I'll read on the other extreme where I'm trying to read a book and I think there's a lot of telling, such as Jordan walked into the room and she's 5'7" and she's wearing a tie-dye shirt. And it doesn't, you get so lost into the details, and I find myself skimming that. It's just as important to read and study books that aren't written flawlessly as it is to read the ones that are really good. You can learn not only what not to do, but also what you really want to do and take away.
100%. You should never stop learning in your craft. And so now, I mean, we're both active writers, we're both active readers, we both have demanding day jobs and families. How do you balance everything?
I think work and writing balance is a myth. When I'm working, it's not a delineation. So if I have an idea, I'm going to take out my phone and write it in my notes app so that when I do have time, an hour to myself to actually write, I'm not staring at that blank page. I have all of these ideas. So the balance for me isn't really a balance. It's just more of a coexistence.
I'll tend to do more skeletal work at work. So like just bare bones of the scene, and then when I'm able to come home with it, I can flesh it all out, get more into the character's mind, and just kind of work off of that sort of chapter outline.
Oh, tell me an anecdote about writing on the job. Just something that's happened to you while writing on the job that was either really funny or you got interrupted.
So before Wildfire was published, I was talking to another publisher, and they wanted it to be a little more spicy, to upgrade that romance element a little. And as a young author, I was like, whatever you want, I'll do it. And I'm glad I did not listen to that voice, because it would have changed the book if it was more romantic and more spicy. And so I was on my lunch break at work trying out some spice in the book, and things got heated. A whole scene happened, and before I know it, there's a kid at the desk to pay their rent. I am beat red. And thank goodness the computer screen faces away from them, so they can't see what I'm doing. But like, they had to have known. They had to have known. So I definitely learned my lesson there.
I love that. I know that you've got, like, right now you're turning over all of the kids in the apartments that you manage, and it's a really stressful time for you. So how do you manage doing your job, which is very time consuming and demanding right now, with also writing?
Yeah, so usually my job allows me a nice half-hour lunch break. I take out my desk, I eat my sandwich, I write my 200 words, and that's how I would balance. This month is very difficult with all the extra work, and so it it felt like a long distance relationship with my characters, because I couldn't be with them physically on the page. But I was listening to their playlist. I was in my short time at home, I was making mood boards on Pinterest to just stay in their world, stay motivated. And I would run through dialogue while I was cleaning apartments and just what sounded natural. And I recorded on my phone, because I couldn't type in the notes app with my rubber gloves. So just staying present with them and just sort of staying obsessed with the story. It's the best way I can describe it.
I love that you called your relationship with your characters a long distance relationship when you can't write, because sometimes it really does feel like you're in a relationship with these characters, but also it keeps you motivated, keeps you interested in what they're going to say. And I just love that, because a lot of times when I find myself getting discouraged with a story, I find it's because I'm not really interested in the character anymore. Either I don't like the character anymore, or I'm not inspired by their story. And so I love that phrase.
I've started so many stories I thought, like, this is going to be the best thing ever. Get 5, 6, 7,000 words into it and lose all steam, because I had written the moment I wanted to write, and that was all that I needed from that.
That's lovely. Or it could feel like a waste of time, just depending on how you look at it.
I try not to, because like I did waste all those weeks and time, but like no, I can save that for later. I can reuse that character, and so you try to look at it with a positive outlook.
Okay, so let's talk about, because you're talking about feeling like you wasted time and maybe you should go back and revisit that. It's almost like a sunk cost. I started that story, maybe I should finish it. So sometimes when we're doing that, there's like a pressure to behave a certain way, or you've got to meet a certain expectation. This is your inner critic trying to instill doubt. I can't publish this. I've got to keep going.
Like the perfectionist side from it.
It's not just perfectionism. It's that, it's almost like perfectionism, but it can also be like just nobody's going to read this.
Gotcha. Something I struggled with a lot in the beginning, and it prevented me from just sitting down and writing when I first started this hobby, quote unquote, was the voice in the back of my head being like, why are you doing this? There's no point. It's gonna be bad. Don't even bother. It happens more often than I think any writer wants to admit, but it is that demon that lurks in our shoulders. And for me, I'll read back things I was really proud of that I wrote. Like, I did do that. I did do something great. And then I'll think about what my goals are, and like, I thought I could do this 2 years ago when I wasn't as skilled. So why do I feel I can't do it now? And just sort of, I always say everything's possible through spite. And so if I can prove myself wrong, then I'm going to do it. If I can prove all the naysayers wrong, I'm going to do it. But some days are hard, but just know that you've been through them before, so like you are stronger because of it. You can do it again. Just try not. It's okay to feel upset and feel bad because it means you're human and it means that you want to improve, but don't let it keep you down. So I always, like I said, just look back at things you're proud of and F you, inner critic, I'm going to beat you.
I'm going to emphasize that. F you, inner critic.
I feel like there might be times when you do want to listen to your inner critic. Because my very first novel I wrote, it was a space opera that I had no business writing as a 19-year-old. And that inner critic was like, you're not ready for this. Like, this is too big for you to bite off. Like, you don't know how to write sci-fi yet. And I'm like, no, I know how to do it. I know how to do it. And I spent a whole year writing like 20,000 words of this space odyssey opera story. And I love it. I will rewrite it one day. But I should have listened to that critic because I was not ready to write that yet. I didn't know how to world build. I didn't know how to cool sci-fi words that made sense. And it was very young.
Cool sci-fi words that make sense.
It's my biggest flaw. If you look at any of my drafts, it'll just be sci-fi word here and middle arm name here.
Actually, I think that's a really cool tip to keep your writing flowing. One thing that I was told early in my writing process was to use the letters TK anytime you don't want to stop writing, but you need to remember a name, or you need to look up a place, or in your case, you need to come up with a sci-fi word. And the reason that you use the letters TK is because there's no word in the English language that has T and K together. So if you hit Control Find in your document or whichever software you're using, you can go immediately to all the places you need to fix upon editing and you won't miss any.
That's so smart. So that way when you're writing, you're not taking the time to get out of the zone to figure it out. You can just keep on going through.
And when you think of that sci-fi word, put it in your notes in your phone, and then you can come back to it. Yes, yes.
How do you silence the bad voice in your head that could keep you from achieving what you want?
So this is one of those things where even as you ask me how I silence my inner critic, that inner critic in my head is telling me, I'm still here. You've not silenced me. You can't conquer me. I'm always going to be there. I think when I'm writing, it has nothing to do with the existence of the current writing. It has all of the buildup from rejections in the past, critiques I've gotten in the past, things that end up making it where I am wondering, is somebody going to say X about my story? Is somebody going to tell me that my plot is leading my character's decisions? Is somebody going to tell me that I'm telling too much in this story instead of showing? And it's really difficult to not feel like you just shouldn't be doing it. When I first started writing, I had nobody looking at my work. And I thought, this is amazing. I'm wonderful. Everything's perfect. And then I got that first person to look at my story. And then I got another person. And it was a lot of really good feedback, but it was very constructive. And so the more feedback I get, the more I hear that feedback in my head. And sometimes it overpowers my characters' voices or where the story is going. And I need to really focus on just keeping my story as mine until I feel like it's in a good space. If I start writing a story and try to get feedback too early, that inner critic will smother the story and I won't be able to continue. And so with this new story that I'm writing, I'm trying very, very hard to not share the bulk of the story until I have it in a place where I feel really good about where it's going. But everybody experiences that inner critic differently. So what does your inner critic say in your head? And could our inner critics be friends?
If they were friends, it would not be good for us. My inner critic is constantly like, no one's going to like this. It's already been done before. Like, this only makes sense to you. Why even bother? And I'm a firm believer that anything is possible through spite. So if I can prove that voice wrong, that's what motivates me, just to write through it and like, just this is going to be the best thing ever. Just you wait. And I do agree with what you said about not showing your stuff until you're ready, because if it's those first early stages, it's kind of crumbly in its foundation, and someone can come with a hammer and shatter it and change it, and maybe just convince you not to write it. And so having that firm foundation, that firm belief in it before finding your beta readers, your critique partners, is, I think, a very important step.
I do think that that is a mistake, that we try to get feedback early because we want somebody to say we're on the right track. But the whole point of feedback is to say, well, here's all the questions that I have. So if you show it too early, you haven't really thought through those questions yet. And that inner critic gets reinforcement. It feeds off of early feedback. For anybody that has that inner critic and that self-doubt, really needs to focus on giving themselves a little space, a little grace, and allowing themselves to actually write the story that they want to write, no matter how bad it is on the page.
In college, when I was rewriting our D&D scenes, the two other players would read them, and I called them my cheerleading readers, because it was bad, but that didn't matter. They were excited and they were encouraging. And so I think those kind of readers are important in the beginning, but they should just be there to cheer you on and just be like, this is awesome.
Isn't that your mom?
That is my mom. Everyone needs a mom critic.
Everybody needs a mom supporter. So a parallel to inner critic, and something that often gets confused, is there's an inner critic that's telling you that you're not good enough or that you're not going to be able to write the story. But then there's, inner critic's best friend, imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome comes out when you've gotten an accomplishment, whether it's publishing a book or publishing a short story, or maybe you win an award. And that imposter syndrome is saying, well, maybe I shouldn't be here. Like, I don't belong here. So as somebody who has a trilogy out and another book in the works, tell me a little bit about, have you ever felt imposter syndrome, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, so when Wildfire, the first book in the Ashes Over Avalon trilogy, was published, even before it was published, when we signed with the publisher, I kept waiting to wake up, because how did I, someone without any real background in writing besides just loving it, do this? How did I write a book? How did I find the agent, get the publisher deal, get it out there? And so I just kept waiting for someone to tell me, it's over, it's not real, it was a joke. And a year had passed, I was still waiting, and finally I told myself, it's not going to happen. You're holding your book. People like it. It's here. You're here. And so that kind of helped, just reassuring myself every morning, like, I'm an author, dang it.
I remember the Instagram post that you had at a table with the pen in hand, getting ready to sign. And I remember how excited you were, because that was not long after we first met.
Correct.
I believe in group we were critiquing the story that you were working on with Ada, and
yes, it was a fantasy best friend story that I'm going to go back to.
Yes, so we were critiquing that, but I remember you talking about how many times you'd rewritten the story, all of the work that you had done pitching your book. And so when it finally happened and you were signing the page, for me that was just kind of the epitome. So that is the converse of what you're experiencing, because you see yourself as, I don't belong here, and somebody who hasn't published a book yet, for me that's like, it does happen. I have friends that have published books. I've seen them get agents. I've seen them get published. And so you don't know who you're mentoring. I'm going to tell you a story that has nothing to do with writing. So I was at an event where my boss had gotten up and was informing us of a huge change. Well, later I found out that there was a whole table watching me for my reaction. And so I created all of this fear in another group of people, because they were expecting me to either react positively or negatively, and I was setting the tone. So when you have something like imposter syndrome, but even if you make deprecating comments about yourself, you don't realize who you're mentoring. You don't realize who's looking up to you to support them in their own dreams. And so I feel like giving into imposter syndrome is kind of selfish, because not only have you made it, but people are looking to you to guide their own behavior and their own hopes and dreams. So how do you know you're not instilling imposter syndrome in the next generation of writers?
I love that. And that makes me rethink, like, every thought I have, because, like, what if What if a young writer heard what I was saying about myself, and I don't want them to feel discouraged or not even try just because I'm feeling a certain way? That's a great, it's a great way to look at it. So, I mean, I've got the book published, but you've got a half a dozen short stories and flash fictions and a poetry publication. Does imposter syndrome play into that?
There's so much imposter syndrome. And as I'm telling you, you shouldn't do that because people are looking at you. I feel it so often. I have 2 finished novels that I can't bring myself to go back to. I'm working on a third one that I'm really excited about and trying to keep this one very close to my heart until I'm ready to share it so that I don't make the mistakes that I've done with the other 2. But a part of me is like, have I spent years working on my craft, going to school, getting an MFA, working on all these short stories, and nothing's going to come of it? And that's the imposter syndrome for me. I know that even as a published author, you have pitched new books that you haven't found a home for yet. Tell me the difference between pitching a novel that you got acceptance for and something like Sea Shanty, which is beautiful and finished but still hasn't found a home.
The publisher who picked up Ashes Over Avalon is the same publisher who's doing Failing Gravity, which is a young adult cyberpunk love letter to Bad Omens, which is a metal band. And I think they picked that up just because it's sort of in the same science fiction realm, whereas the passion project name is called She Shanty, but I think the title will be A Sea of Ships and Souls. That's more young adult fantasy. It's set in a fantastical Caribbean environment, which is sort of not what they're looking for, which I totally get. And so it feels almost like whiplash because my publisher is like, "Yep, we want this one right away." And I've been marketing Sea Shanty with my agent to other publishers for almost a year, and there's been no bites. There's been no interest in it, and I'm constantly reminded, well, it's just not marketable now. People aren't looking for that now. We're coming into the dead of winter. People don't want mermaids and pirate treasure and hot oceans. They want more cozy and fall stories and spooky things. And so we're going to shelve it. We're going to try again in the spring. And it's just having that belief in the work. Like, I'm so proud of A Sea of Ships and Souls. I love the characters. I love their journey. And for me to give up on them just feels like giving up on myself. So I'll shelve it. We'll come back to it in the spring, and it will find a home somewhere.
Sounds like you don't have any inner critic whatsoever. It will find a home. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of really great stuff today. I think that this has been enlightening for me. So that's amazing.
It's no shocker, but it is nice to know other people have the self-doubt. They have that imposter syndrome, like, because you're really not alone in writing. And so just know that other people also have that doubt. Other people also have that fear, and it's okay. You just gotta be better than it. You just gotta keep going.
So just a reminder, comparison is the enemy.
Learn to silence your inner critic.
Writing when inspiration takes you is important, even if it's during work. You can take a couple seconds to jot some notes down.
And always remember, you do belong in this space. You are a writer. You are an author.
Exactly. You are the only one that can write your story, and if you don't write it, no one will.
So that's all we have today for this episode of Everyday Writers.
Join us for our next episode, Tools for the Job, where we'll discuss different writing resources and platforms. We'll even discuss that scary generative AI, all things to help you get your writing on the page.
If you have any questions or comments, join our Facebook community. We would love to hear from you. Until then, see you next time, and don't forget, every day is a good day to write.